Thank you so much for being here. I'm Principal Amy McVicker, Principal at Farallon View, and I'm joined tonight by Selena Turney. She's our CUSD District Literacy Support Services or Literacy Support Specialist, and she's here tonight to talk to you all about reading, how our children learn to read, and to help you and all of us work as a team to inspire a love of reading in our students.
Thank you for taking time out of your evening to be with us tonight. To, as Amy said, to inspire that love of reading, not only in your child but amongst your family. So, reading is one of those things that the more you do, the more curiouser you get. And that's the idea of how we can help children learn to read. And so that's why we are getting curious about reading. Reading is a complex skill and it makes us uniquely human. We are the only animals that can actually read. And it's made up of many, many different kinds of skills. And it is honed and acquired after years and years of practice and instruction all along the way. And basically, there's two different strands that weave together to form reading. And they are the strand of comprehension and the other strand of word recognition. So I'm going to talk about for just a moment right here, this comprehension piece. So comprehension, when we're understanding what we're reading, so it helps us to have a very large background knowledge on our subject matter to help us read. So we are going to be adding our background knowledge and bring it with us every time that we read. We're going to also bring different types of vocabulary that we know on the topic. And we're going to think also about how we know different types of texts are structured. So if we're going to be reading an informational text, we can get ideas about which section we're going to read by the subheadings. We can look at the photographs. We can look at the captions. Knowing the different types of texts we are looking at is going to help us understand the message embedded in the text, in the language. If we have good reasoning skills, we can use those ideas to ask questions inside our mind. Does this agree with what I know already? How do I know this? Or is this a new idea? And where will I put it in my mind when I think about this next? So comprehension is an active kind of resource gathering skill that we add all the time, not only when we're reading, but when we're talking in dialogue with one another. When we're doing this word recognition in this particular way, this is what happens when we're learning to read. So reading is like decoding a system of symbols. In and of itself, those letters that form together to make words really wouldn't mean anything. But we all agree that these particular shapes make sounds, and those sounds, when put together into patterns, form words, and words come together to form sentences and so on. So our first thing we need to do when we're learning how to read is to understand what sound each one of the shapes make, and we call that phonological awareness. Then the next thing we have to do is look at all the patterns and say, oh, I recognize this pattern. It's pronounced this way. And we decode letters, patterns, words. That's what happens when we read aloud. We translate those shapes into words. And then the last thing we do in terms of word recognition is we learn to memorize and recognize certain words that we see over and over and over again. Our brain wants to know those things. So the more words we read, the more opportunity for our brain to get stronger and stronger and to see more and more patterns. So that's why when you know more words and you do more reading, it's easier to understand new things and to add them into your knowledge. So that, in a nutshell, is the two strands. And as you can see, each one of those strands are made up of lots and lots of tiny other little pieces. But when woven together, they become this beautiful thing, which we call reading. So of course, the main thing that's going to help us read is our motivation, our desire, our want to learn how to read, to go places and learn things beyond where we are in our physical space here. So motivation is just really an incredible indicator of our success in later reading. And as you can see, we've got our two strands side by side again. And we can see that on the left, we've got our decoding and our encoding. And again, we have our word recognition and spelling strategies. So the first thing that we do in kindergarten and before is we learn about concepts of print. So what is that, you say? Well, that's that we read from the left side of the page to the right side of the page. And we start at the top of the page and we read all the way down to the bottom. That's not necessarily intuitive. It's something that we've been taught. So this is something that we teach children to do when they're first learning how to read. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what I was talking about before, is this phoneme awareness. So that's the awareness of what sound does each one of those shapes make. From there, we go to the phonics, and this is where we are practicing at school our foundations, and we're practicing our patterns that we are finding within words. And maybe our digraphs, our CH makes this sound, even though they're two letters, together they make one sound. So that would be our understanding of phonics happening right there, and our practice of that. The next thing that happens is we begin learning more and more and more sight words. And there are probably about 500 to 1,000 sight words that your child is going to probably learn by second or third grade. And those are things that we need to practice every day, because that will allow us, when we're reading, or our child, when he or she is reading, to become more fluent. And when more time is devoted to comprehending and less time is devoted to decoding, then we can truly understand what we are reading. Our ultimate goal when we are fluent is that we are automatic. When we are looking at text, we know what those words are because we know shapes of words and we know the patterns. Learning all of these types of strategies as we become more and more proficient at reading helps us to gain access to this comprehension piece. So of course, when we are learning about new topics, we want to have as big a background knowledge as we can. And that comes from experiences, and it also comes from building that vocabulary. Also, to become a good reader, we begin to realize the types of sentences that there are. So not only are there statements, questions, and exclamations, but we have sentences that have clauses in them. And we have complex sentences and we have simple sentences. So the more we learn about how words are put together, the more easily we can comprehend each sentence and how it fits into a paragraph, a page, a chapter, or a story. Finally, it's one thing to have all these strategies, but if we never check ourselves and we just go reading 500 miles an hour down the road, and we never check to say, well, did I understand what I read? Then we will have missed an opportunity to build our internal knowledge. And so good readers always stop and say, let me think about what I just read. And so that's a strategy and a skill that we teach our children all the way from when they're kindergartners. Even when we are doing read alouds, we always stop and say, wow, what just happened in the story? And what do you think will happen next? And when we ask those questions, we are monitoring and finding out whether or not we understood what we have read. And of course, the very, very last thing that happens with comprehension is we say, wow, I just read this incredible book. I learned this new thing about whales, and I want to add that into what I know already about whales, if I've been reading a book about whales. So that is another purpose that we have when we're reading, is that we want to understand what we've read so we can deepen and broaden our knowledge. So the next time we read a book, we have even more knowledge than we had the time before. So these are the ideas that come within and around learning how to read. It's first about that decoding piece and all those basic skills. And then secondly, it's about the comprehension. What is happening? Do I understand? What will happen next? Have I read something that's similar? How does it contradict what I already know? Or does it add to what I already know? So asking questions all along the way is what good readers do. How can we at home or anybody outside of the classroom, how can we support our children in practicing? Of course, we have our high frequency words. It's kind of boring, but it's really important to memorize those words. Practicing them every day, every day. It could be on the drive to school. It can be while you're making breakfast in the morning. Anything at all. You don't need to be knowing what the words are meaning. It's just about, does my brain recognize that word? The second thing is that our child needs to read out loud every day. Why out loud? Well, if I'm reading and I don't know what a word is, and I guess at it, and I guess wrong, then I'm reinforcing A, wrong idea of a word in my head, and B, I might be totally missing the point of the story. However, if I read that word out loud and I've been kind of paying attention to my reading, then I'll say, hey, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't say slam, it says slap. I get it now. I made a mistake. I read this out loud and now I missed that M and I turned it into, I should make it into a P. So reading out loud for beginning readers is very, very important. And also, they will be able to hear themselves becoming more and more fluent. So they'll be able to first start decoding bigger and bigger patterns in words, and you'll be able to hear that as a parent. Then the next thing, they'll be stringing words together, then small phrases together, and then entire sentences together. And you're going to be able to hear this happen if your child reads out loud. And they should be reading every day for at least 20 minutes out loud. And they don't have to read different things. They can read the same book. In fact, it's highly recommended by researchers who study literacy that for beginning and emergent readers, that they practice the same text at least 5 times, reading it over again and again and again, because it builds automaticity. So the next thing is about connecting your reading to everyday life. So that means if I'm reading a book about whales, maybe I could go to the ocean and see if I could see any. Or maybe I'm going to go to the aquarium and see if I can learn more about who might be living with the whales, what kind of environment they live in. So this is the fun part about being a parent, is that you get to support the beautiful part of reading. And when you do, it makes the more rote parts, the kind of things that we're doing in the classroom every day, teaching them the patterns and the skills and the practices of good readers. It supports that when you take your child out and have experiences with them and have conversations with them about what they're seeing and what they're reading. So making those connections Having those conversations are really, really, really important. Then we need to chart our reading progress. And what does that mean? So like I was mentioning before, when we are first starting to read, we read just one letter at a time. And then we read a couple, and it's very kind of painful. And maybe in 1 minute, we only read 10 words. And that's pretty good if we are just learning how to read in any language, right? But if we practice reading every day and we read out loud and we read the books 3 or 4 times, if we were to test our reading again, maybe we could read 30 words in 1 minute. So sometimes it's very lovely to have like a little graph that tells us how many words did we read in 1 minute, so that we can see how our fluency is progressing. And again, fluency is important because the faster and more automatic our reading is, the more our brain can focus on understanding what we're reading about. So the very last thing is, think about sharing your new learnings with other people. So it's great when you ask your child, what did you read? And you can help scaffold that with maybe going back through the book and looking at the pictures, or finding some key words, maybe some vocabulary words, and saying, tell me about this word. What does it mean? How did you learn about it? Do you know anything else that camouflages in the wild? You know, any number of those kind of conversations that you can have with your child, to have them share what they've learned, to sort of teach you what they learned, makes them understand the materials, and it makes the reading seem valuable for them. So sharing is a fabulous and wonderful way to support your new reader. How can we as parents help at home? Well, the best thing, some of the most fun things are creating your own family traditions. So you could have your family story time, and now, now that it's getting a little colder, it could be like, okay, we get a cup of hot chocolate, we sit on the couch with a blanket, and we read a story every night. So creating those little traditions are really, really important. Even going to a bookstore, especially I really enjoy going to independent bookstores, because not only do they have beautifully written books that are language rich, but they also have great illustrations. And sometimes there are books that are written by local authors, and that's always really a wonderful thing to do, is to support local talent. So going to bookstores are fun. And then, of course, reading to each other. So yes, of course, you're going to be reading to them, but they can read to you too. You can share pages. And reading together is something that can happen all the way to 5th grade. You can read Harry Potter together. Your kids are never too old to hear a master reader read, someone who can read well with fluency and what we call paucity. So it's enjoyable for the child, and it's enjoyable for us too when we get to read with our kids. So create those traditions. Make a space for books. Have a library that's filled with actual real books. I know that it's the digital age, but it's always very important to have a book in your hand, especially if you're a beginning reader, because that movement of moving left to right, of tracking those words underneath with your fingers, is very, very important. That tactile information, that kinesthetic movement, will help the brain sync up with the visual to memorize how to read specific words. And having a lot of books is fun anyway. And then talk a lot. Talk about everything. And have conversations that are more than yes or no, but that go back and forth several times, at least 4 or 5 times. Ask questions. wonder about things. And these are the delicious parts about being a parent, is that you get to wonder together and be curious and be silly and all sorts of wonderful things like that. Play with words. Don't be afraid to play. Get silly. And then the last thing is play games, play word games. Go fish, concentration, bingo. In fact, today we played high frequency word bingo with the kids today. And it was a game, but you know what? They got repetition of those words like 3 or 4 times. And they learned them even better, and they didn't realize it because it was fun to play a game. Find words inside words. How many words can you find in the word California? Some of my friends and I, we found about 100 words. So that game never gets tired. Write a poem, a nonsense poem. So the more playful we can get around literacy, the more enjoyable it is for our kids, and the more confident that they'll be about learning new things and being curious. And that's really what we want in our children. I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you do at home that's sort of a ritual?
In my own tradition for myself, I usually have to wait for the weekends or for breaks to read for pleasure these days since I get so busy, but I try to make time to pick a book that I'm just really excited to read about, and then chat with my friends about it, and try to get some good book recommendations from them too.
Do you chat with them online, or are you able to be with them in person?
Usually it's over the phone or text, but yeah. And then when I was younger, I remember I had the coolest space as a late elementary student into middle school, because I went to a K-8 school. So around like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I had a bunk bed, and then underneath I had a beanbag chair and a beaded curtain and a little desk lamp that hooked over the little board on the bunk bed. And so it was just the best place to just relax and read a book after school. And that was my tradition growing up too. So
when I was growing up, my dad, he used to read a lot to me, even after I could read well. And we read lots and lots and lots of things. And I didn't really think about it at all as being a special thing. And then when, it was just something that happened in our family. And then when his mother came to live with him, at the end of her days, he read to her every single day.
oh gosh.
And it was like such a beautiful thing to watch him read to her, and such a connection that they had, that there's no other connection like that, right? So reading can really bring people together. It's not just necessarily about learning something new. So I need to know, if you all enjoyed this, what might be some other things that you'd like to know about? This is the beginning of this beautiful relationship between the school, the home, the children, learning new things and being curious. It's something that will grow and grow and grow and be remembered for many, many years to come.